This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, we are certainly in for quite the show this week. I walked into quite the visual circus with this week's Dynamite, and I'm still trying to figure out whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. The main event for that show was hilarious for a wide range of reasons, and I don't think I'll be able to do it justice when we report on it, but I'll give it my best college try. Then there was the rest of the show, which, well, it was the usual. Not to immediately go off on the weekly AEW diatribe. I know that's sort of where the entertainment value comes with these podcasts. Oh, don't you worry, we will tear into that thing eventually. Got a heck of a schedule coming up in the next couple weeks, so I'm sort of waiting out how I want to factor in some of this wrestling talk. I should be able to keep the Monday and the Friday formats going. It's going to be a little challenging trying to pack in some of this retro content, unless I watch it all on the weekend, which I may have to. The good thing is that some of these Crockett shows in the next few weeks are shorter, so I should be able to get through those in about an hour or so. Same with the World Class reviews. I usually only need about an hour, hour and a half to watch those shows and take notes on them. Sometimes the Crockett shows take longer depending on whether or not they go the full 90 minutes. The other stuff I just try to fill in the void when I can. I've been doing this for a couple years now. I've kind of developed a formula when it comes to getting everything together for these shows. Problem is I do this as a side hustle, so it's not like I have 8 hours in the day to carve out all the time to do this. But, I enjoy it. Doesn't pay the bills, but comes with the territory. If I knew I could blow up the channel and reach a bigger audience, I'd maybe consider it. But then I'd have to answer to YouTube sponsors and try to play the corporate game to please everybody. I'd have to cut back on the swearing and all the controversial opinions, and, well, that would be sacrificing my values, and I'm not about that life. But that's why I duplicate my videos on Rumble, too. I still appreciate the people that take the time to come back and listen every week. Glad that there's a small pool of people out there that appreciate what I have to say. It's frustrating sometimes being the odd man out, but it's kind of how I live my entire life. Never really was the kind of guy that liked blending in with the majority opinion. Most of the time people are sheep anyway. They'll just agree with what everyone else says because they think it sounds right. I'm more so the guy that says, nah, screw you, you're wrong, and here's why. And Lord knows when it comes to the wrestling talk, I find myself saying that a lot. It's probably why I wouldn't consider working for places like the Wrestling Observer, because I just constantly would be butting heads with everybody that works there, saying, nah, you're wrong about this, or nah, this segment was stupid, this is how it should have been done, and here's why. And no one would want to hear it. I certainly couldn't have any rational conversations with anyone about AEW. This show, dude. This show. Getting me to sit through this thing was a real chore this week. Between work exhaustion and well, the simple fact that the show sucks, I was kind of putting off even wanting to watch it. But I powered through it on Thursday, got back a little earlier than normal from teaching, so what better way to spend my Thursday evening than trying to figure out what the hell Tony Khan is doing with this disaster of a TV program. Guess a lot of people are just giving up trying. Judging by their viewership last week, I think a lot of people just threw up their hands and said, fuck it, we're tapping out with this one. And I didn't even think that show last week was that particularly bad. I mean, not that I remember anything I saw. Talked about it before. I watch these Dynamite shows and then almost immediately forget everything that I saw after it airs. I mean, I even take copious amounts of notes with some of these segments. Not as much as I used to. And I do notice a drastic increase in question marks and lots of bold print exclamations of all the stupid shit that happens. Take, for example, this week's opener. In big, bold font letter size, my question reads as follows. Claudio Castagnoli versus Rey Fenix in a Double Jeopardy Ring of Honor World title match that's a title match, but not really? What? No, I'm not kidding. That's what I wrote. I mean, I could screen cap it for you if you don't believe me, but I think my demonstration told a clear picture. Seriously, what? A Ring of Honor Double Jeopardy match with Claudio versus Rey Fenix for two belts that have barely been addressed on the show in months, with stipulations that couldn't even be clearly explained by their fucking Mark play-by-play commentator. Even this jabroni couldn't explain the rules without bumbling and fumbling all over himself like a dribbling idiot. Did you hear that? How many times did Excalibur stutter over himself trying to explain the rules of this? Okay, so it's a singles match with two current ROH champions that nobody knows about, discount the marks, and they're wrestling each other to determine who gets to wrestle the other guy, I believe at a later point for the titles, but not this match or something like that. I don't fucking know, nor do I care. Do you see why I never remember shit that happens on this garbage fest the week after it airs? Who could possibly care? Show of hands right now. Anyone that even knew who the current Ring of Honor World Champion and or Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champions were prior to this segment? Who knew that? I had so distantly put this ROH crap behind me, it never even crossed my mind one time to remember who the Ring of Honor champions are in this company. I mean, aren't there like 7? Not that any of the belts mean a fucking thing anyway. Why was this match even happening on Dynamite? Wasn't the whole point of the Ring of Honor streaming service to put all this stuff on that platform and keep it off of Dynamite so you can make room for everybody else? And beyond all the other obvious questions I've asked in the last 2 minutes regarding everything about this match that didn't make sense, let us not overlook the most apparent one. Why was this match even happening, period? Claudio's been involved with all the elite BCC drill over the last month. The Lucha fucks, I don't even remember the last thing those guys were involved with on TV. Weren't they both just recently in a battle royal on television where they both got dumped midway through like a pair of job guys? It's not like either of them have been working together on TV or interacting in any way. So why was this happening? Beats me. Because Tony's a Mark Booker and thought it would be cute. Because he picked up a Claudio and a Rey Fenix action figure over the weekend and said, that sounds like a fun match. Let's do that. Then he put them out there on TV to do a bunch of sloppy choreographed spots for 15 minutes. That was pretty much the match they had. Rey Fenix does one style of match, choppy, overly choreographed lucha parkour. Claudio can kind of modify his power game to adapt to that ring style, but even Claudio's not a miracle worker trying to make anything Fenix does look good. They basically had a 15-minute, let's try a bunch of stuff match. Some of it looked impressive, some of it looked hideously awful. And there really wasn't a whole lot of middle ground. They fought on the floor for like a month straight. At one point, Claudio tried to do the ring step walk where he was holding Fenix upside down in a vertical suplex position. And then he sort of just lost his balance and kind of dropped Rey Fenix over the barricade. And you could see Fenix like waving off Claudio to move away because I guess he was trying to call some kind of audible. And then he did the ring barricade walk spot that visually looked cool. But then you realize that Claudio had to just stand there with his arms outward in order to catch the guy when he went to do the Hurricane Rana. So in other words, phonier than a football bat. Again, it's just a collection of high offense video game moves. It's what we call the modern indie match in wrestling. At random points during this, they kept showing Flat Wheel Yuta and Bryan Danielson watching on the monitor. And first of all, my God, Danielson. What the fuck are they doing with this guy? Can you believe that it was only like 2 months ago this guy had one of the best AEW matches of the year on pay-per-view with MJF? Arguably one of the better Iron Man matches we've seen in wrestling in years. What a follow-up. This is what they're doing with him 2 months later. This garbage BCC versus Elite feud that just blows all kinds of dick. And then there's Yuta standing next to him, looking like the fucking sales greeter at Best Buy. Skinny arm, facially blank nobody. So anyway, while I'm watching Claudio get dragged through the mud and all this hot garbage, the finish is Claudio hitting Fenix with some really sick-looking burning hammer move off his shoulders. Of course, that was only a 2 count. And then he followed it with a bunch of fake-looking anvil elbows and a Ricola bomb for the 3. Both of which looked significantly less impressive than the burning hammer move. And, well, at least Claudio won. There was some redeeming quality to come out of it by the end. Good Lord. I mean, what else do you want me to say? Look, man. I'm as big a proponent of Claudio Castagnoli as anybody out there that's followed his career and knows the kind of talent that guy is. I understand that WWE did him wrong for years. And I know for a lot of people, it got to a point with him where you just kind of gave up hope thinking that they were ever going to get it with him. They had him around for years, subjugated him to mid-card purgatory. And while there were times where he got pushes up the card, well, we all know the fallout. Nothing ever facilitated from it. I never expected AEW to get it right with him either. But the fact that it took them less than 6 months to just bury the guy into a faction to make him just another dude on the show. I mean, I'm surprised, but not surprised at the same time. Claudio could have easily been a guy that could have fit right up there with some of their top shelf baby faces. He's a well-rounded enough talent. People respect his contributions to the business. Naturally, I don't think many people ever wanted to boo Claudio to begin with. So, of course, now he's a heel. But him and MJF for the AEW World Championship could have been an easy feud. The promos might not have been the best, because Claudio's never been the strongest promo in the world, but there are easy ways to work around that. Now we're seeing Claudio submerged in all this BCC garbage, And it's just totally wasting him. And now I don't care about him anymore. I certainly don't care that he's the Ring of Honor World Champion. It's a shame. I was actually kind of depressed watching this match. Because I thought back to all the what could have been scenarios with Claudio when he first showed up in AEW. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's been about a year, right? I think Claudio debuted on the Forbidden Door pay-per-view last summer. Last-minute replacement, too, from what I remember. Because if I'm not mistaken, what was it? Wasn't Danielson injured or something, so Claudio had to fill in at the last minute? And I remember people being really excited to see him. I remember that pop. Now here he is a year later. He's wrestling in the TV opener and... I'm just not as interested. They kind of killed Claudio Castagnoli for me. And it's unfortunate. Because if Tony would have just played his cards right, actually try to be a smart booker for once in his miserable fucking life, perhaps instead of him running with his Mark Mentality 4 Pillars program that nobody gives a shit about, I don't know. Maybe they could have made some money off of MJF versus Claudio for the AEW World title at this year's Double or Nothing. Sure seems more enticing than anything they've done with MJF in the last 2 months with all the current rubbish surrounding him. But I think I've spent long enough longing for the days that Claudio was ever going to make a difference in this product. Let's talk about another lost opportunity that could have made a difference in this product if Tony actually wanted to make some money and grow his brand. Miro. He's back. Again. And this time he's storming into the boss's office. I didn't even know Tony Khan had an office. I thought he was just casually sitting out at Gorilla fapping off to all the bad indie matches going on every week. No. Turns out Tony actually has his own exclusive office at the buildings every week. I can only imagine what's inside. Probably nothing I want to know about. But Miro didn't hesitate to barge in. He was pissed at God for the past 9 months straight. He ascended from purgatory, and now it would seem that his path is clear. God said, "And ye shall strike the hammer of justice down on Tony Cocaine Khan." And now Miro has climbed out of purgatory to, well, apparently go bitch at the boss for leaving him off television for the better part of a year. It'd be nice to actually think that anything will come out of this, but how many times have we given up our hopes that AEW will ever get it right with anybody? What was the last thing they even did with Miro on television before he disappeared? Does anyone even remember? I remember all the random purgatory vignettes, but there was a brief period where he was back, right? And then he wasn't. I don't really know. But, I mean, he looked angry. And if I'm the boss and I've got a pissed off 330-pound Bulgarian kicking down my office door, I'm giving that guy the keys to the fucking building. In assurance he doesn't rip my head off and eat me for lunch. Give the dude what he wants. So we'll see if Miro manages to talk Tony into giving him a fair shake this time. Doubt it. Yet again, though, bringing to light another guy that I would have loved to have seen get a push in the world title scene at one point. But instead, Tony decided he'd rather settle on Darby Allin, Jungle Boy, and Sammy Guevara. According to MJF here, not just the 4 pillars of AEW, but the Beatles of AEW. He tried to compare them all individually to each member of the Beatles, and I think his general conclusion was that Sammy was Ringo, Darby was George, Jungle Boy was John, and MJF was Paul. interesting analysis. I wrote down all three of them are Ringos, and MJF is John, Paul, and George all combined into one. And I say that as a drummer. Ringo fucking sucked. And I will debate anybody on that. One of the worst drummers of all time. Naturally, what you would call a compatible fit with AEW's four pillars. You got one natural gifted prodigy, and then you got three lousy indie-minded dorks that only the marks will ever pay money to see on a mainstream level. And this is what we're apparently getting in the main event on pay-per-view in 3 weeks. Could have had MJF versus Claudio, or MJF versus Miro. But no. Instead, we're getting MJF versus three Ringos. Thanks for that one, Tony. And then we got the dumbest segment of all time. I don't even know what the hell happened here. But all I know is whoever came up with the idea for this thing, whether it was Tony, whether it was the boys involved, or a conglomeration of the bunch, none of them should ever be allowed to put anything together on a wrestling show ever after this fiasco. So out come FTR, and the fact that I even have to lump poor Dax and Cash into this is sad, but I'm just trying to call a spade a spade. People are very biased when it comes to reviewing the particulars of this show. We have our fan favorites, but let's be frank, sometimes even our favorites, they're involved with some pretty bad shit. I actually have heartily wrote down here, outwalk the 1990 Midnight Express. But I didn't want to take more underhanded shots at FTR because I can't imagine they were fully responsible for putting this thing together, but they were unfortunately involved with it. So they come down to call out Mark Briscoe, and instead they get Jeff Jarrett, Jay Lethal, Sanjay Dutt, and Kali Bootleg. And of course, the story with this thing is that the heels are using Mark Briscoe to get under FTR's skin and, I don't know, I guess cause dissension or whatever. Basically, Lethal and Jarrett won a title match, but FTR will only accept the challenge if the heels acknowledge that they're using Mark Briscoe as a Ponzi scheme. So naturally, out comes Mark Briscoe to play Peacemaker. And he's out there to inform everyone that on behalf of Tony Khan, our genius booker-in-chief, at the pay-per-view in 3 weeks, it's going to be FTR versus Jarrett and Lethal for the AEW World Tag Titles. And Mark Briscoe will be the special guest referee. You know, as opposed to wrestling a fucking match. No, that's apparently Mark Briscoe's consolation prize after his brother tragically died 4 months ago. He's going to get to officiate a title match on pay-per-view. Not wrestle a title match, but officiate. Because Tony's a genius, you see? But that wasn't even the stupid part. Because then they had to book an angle here. And this angle was so beyond preposterous, I can't imagine Dax and Cash actually thought this was a good idea. But they played along because, I don't know, I guess they've already phoned in their new deals. What happens is, Mark attempts to toast to the fact that this is going to be a professional tag match where both teams are going to play by the rules. So, of course, Sanjay takes the drink and throws it in Dax's eyes. And while the heels are ganging up on the faces, Mark Briscoe tries to get in the middle of it to break it up. And one of the most contrived things I have ever seen on a wrestling show in my entire life. I'm not kidding. This is a thing that happened. Mark gets shoved into Dax. And Dax, who, mind you, was just blinded with alcohol 3 seconds prior, he then scoops up Mark for a pile driver. I repeat, a pile driver. And he spikes Mark on his head. Because of course. That's a thing that would realistically happen in any given scenario. I'm sure Dax's first inclination when somebody runs at him and he's temporarily blinded, obviously the first thing on his mind would be to pick the guy up and pile drive him straight down to the floor. Right? Because that wouldn't look visually ridiculous. Not accidentally elbow the guy in the head or give him an accidental punch to the jaw, something that could feasibly happen in real life. No, apparently their grand idea for this was to do a totally artificially contrived pile driver angle that looked visually phony and absurd. How did this get signed off on? Who put this together? Why didn't FTR put their foot down and say, this is fucking dumb, let's do something else? Not only did it make Dax look like a goddamn idiot, the fact that his first inclination when a guy is running toward him and he can't see him is to pick him up and give him a wrestling move. But it wasn't even like a quick spike pile driver. He picked up Mark, held him there for a few seconds, and then dropped him on his head. He had plenty of time to think about it. He's like, I wonder who this guy I'm holding right now is. I don't know. I mean, I have him in my arms. I could contemplate this for a few seconds. You're telling me Mark wasn't like, it's me, Dax, it's me, Mark, don't do it. God, this was so stupid. Made FTR look like fools. The crowd's chanting, you fucked up at Dax, which I don't think was the right kind of reaction. People were kind of laughing at him. And then everyone has to stand around and pretend like this is a serious angle. Like Dax may have just ended Mark's career or something. Like, you kidding me? We see dudes taking Canadian destroyers every week on this show and kicking out at one. Mark took one pile driver from Dax here. And everyone's like, shit, dude. That might be the end of Mark Briscoe. We may never see him again. Put him on the gurney and send him to the morgue. He's done for. So yeah, I hated this. I also hate everything about this feud. But this was sort of the icing on the cake that cemented that opinion. Think about how much effort that takes, by the way. You have a tag team title program. FTR versus Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett. And Lord knows I've been highly critical of Jeff Jarrett on this show. But again, I will reiterate previous talking points. The one thing I've always said about Jeff Jarrett, regardless of the way he was pushed and rammed up my sphincter over the years as a main event guy when he had no business being, the guy's a good wrestler. He knows what he's doing in the ring. Think about how much effort that takes. You have these four guys involved. And I don't want to see the match. Simply because of the way it's been built on television. Awful. You have Sanjay out there acting like a delinquent 4-year-old. The fucking Kali giant is just standing there being completely useless like he's been since day one. My God, this all sucks. Horrible feud. Can't stress enough how much I hate this. And speaking of feuds that I hate, things that are artificially put together on this show with very little forethought, we had a backstage pre-tape where Chris Jericho filed a restraining order against Adam Cole, saying that he's not permitted in the building as long as Jericho's there. After last week where Cole beat up Jericho at the commentary booth and created an unsafe working environment. Now keep in mind, if this were real, legally speaking, I'm like 90% sure Adam Cole would have had to have signed off on that documentation for it to be certified. But we got bigger fish to fry here, because who should show up here but Roderick Strong? Yeah, you all remember Roddy. The guy that debuted on television 2 weeks ago. And then his first match in AEW was a random 8-person tag where he didn't even score the pin. Yeah, that guy. Guess what his second match is going to be in AEW? Yup. In the words of Roddy himself here, not a wrestling match, but a Falls Count Anywhere fight next week. And to make things even more fake and manufactured, Roddy then pulls out another court order, apparently conveniently knowing that Jericho was going to serve Adam Cole here, because this shit is fake, you see. In any case, he tells Jericho that the Jagoff appreciators are also banned from interfering because, I don't know, I guess Falls Count Anywhere means that there are still regulations, so they could potentially get Jericho disqualified or something. More importantly, the setup to this was Jericho saying that Cole cannot touch him if they're in the arena together. So I expect this fight will spill out into the parking lot or something, and Adam Cole will be waiting there with a lead pipe to attack Jericho and beat the shit out of him. Because no one could see that coming a mile away. Maybe he'll be hiding in a dumpster or something and pop out like Oscar the Grouch. That'd be fun. Why not add more unnecessary comedy to this already watered-down sports entertainment program? And oh yeah, Roddy Strong's second match in AEW. A Falls Count Anywhere street fight with Chris Jericho. With 1 week's build. Because of course it is. So that, I'm sure, will also suck a dick. Meanwhile, Renee Paquette somehow managed to magically teleport from across the building in a matter of seconds to cover the next pre-tape. She literally just got done interviewing Jericho about 3 seconds prior, and now she is magically standing in front of Tony Khan's office door trying to interview Miro. So either Renee is Harry Houdini, or this interview station was about 15 feet from Tony's office the whole time. Or this company has no clue how to competently format anything. Anyway, we never found out what happened with Miro. Instead, we had Thunder Rosa randomly showing up for a cameo. And she walks into Tony's office. And much like Miro, we saw her on screen for approximately 15 seconds. She was never mentioned again. And we never saw her again. I'm thinking there might have been some kind of underground dimension at the Little Caesars arena. Because all of a sudden, every single AEW talent that's disappeared from television in the last 8 months, they're all just randomly showing up here unannounced. They're all headed straight for the boss's office. So maybe Tony Khan opened up the secret portal. And now all the disgruntled employees are impeding his office, seeking their revenge. Maybe they'll start a workers' union. That'd be a great AEW faction. The union workers. They can all come out in white suits and ties. Yeah. Because that's what AEW really needs, is more factions, right? It's interesting, too, how Renee wasn't apparently smart enough to just barge into Tony's office herself to figure out what the fuck is going on here. Everybody else waltzed right in. But apparently there was a secret barrier that prevented Renee from going in. Nah, she just stood there contemplating all of it. I wonder what could be going on behind this mysterious Tony Khan door. Riveting journalism from Renee. What a wondrous job she's done with this company. Good signing, Tony. Milking that paycheck for all it's worth. And once again, speaking of these people being terrible at formatting, literally moments after we see Renee standing outside the supposed office of Tony Khan, well, first we get a random Sammy Guevara video package that I skipped over. And then there's Tony Khan, standing in the frame, hyping up yet again, for the 17th week in a row, seems like, a big, grand special announcement, which will be announced next week. My God. You cannot make this shit up, folks. Another one? Seriously? And what's it going to be this time? The special announcement going to be that next time Tony makes an announcement, he'll refrain from having to use a teleprompter? Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. I mean, I can speculate on what I think it's going to be. Most people already sort of figure it's going to involve a secondary Saturday show that they were alluding to at one point. The AEW Collision thing or whatever. I mean, we've speculated about it here on the channel already. If that's the announcement, it's not really anything people already didn't see coming. And we could talk about it more once we get clarification on whether or not that's even the big announcement. But I just love the idea here, how they went from filming a pre-tape where wrestlers are apparently crowding Tony's office to talk with him, and then literally moments later, here he is on camera outside his office making announcements that have nothing to do with anything involving the wrestlers that just waltz into his room minutes prior. Doesn't acknowledge Miro. Doesn't acknowledge Thunder Rosa. He just says, so many wrestlers in AEW want opportunities. So we're led to believe that's what Miro and Thunder Rosa were discussing. They furiously barge into his office because they want opportunities. It took them, what? Well over half a fucking year to figure that out? You're telling me they both collectively decided together that they were going to stampede into Tony Khan's office here to ask him for an opportunity? After both being off of television, completely absent for almost an entire year. What the fuck were they thinking about in the previous 7, 8, 9 months? How badly they wanted to get out of their contracts? Where's Andrade? Is he going to randomly show up next week too? I have no idea what's going on. But if that's what all the suspense was building toward, whatever. I mean, if that means Miro and Thunder Rosa are going to be active parts of the Saturday show, gives me 2 more reasons to check out the Saturday show in the future instead of watching this godforsaken Dynamite program. If they get CM Punk on that show and let him sort of pick and choose the talents he wants to work with on that program, I'll take Miro versus Punk any day of the week. Or even Miro just going out there and fucking killing people in 2-minute squashes. He was doing that at one point. Remember that? Good shit. They ought to be getting him ready to steamroll over Wardlow for the TNT title. And I never thought I would say that. But, I mean, I think the bloom's off the rose with that experiment anyway, so just run with it. But I'll sure take Miro over Orange fucking Cassidy. 30 minutes into this fiasco, and this is the last guy I wanted to see on the show, was this douchebag. So I happily boycotted this match. Him and Danny Garcia out there wasting 15 minutes of national cable TV time for another one of their phony belts. More of Tony Khan's action play toys getting more focal screen time than they're deserving of. It's the same story as always. The continual Randy Orton-like pounding of the company mascot down our throats every God-blessed week. The force continues. And no matter how much Tony tries, it doesn't get me to stick around to suffer through it. So the next thing I caught up with was the Christian Cage promo. Easily the highlight of the entire show, not even close. It still wasn't enough to get me to really care about the idea of Christian versus Wardlow for the TNT title, but the effort was there. It was... it was actually one of those heel promos that steered off a little bit in the wrong direction at one point, because while you had Christian taking shots at Wardlow and talking about his daddy issues, you also had the points where Christian was undercutting Arn Anderson, calling out his son Brock, who I completely forgot existed on this show, saying that Arn was nothing more than a lapdog for Ric Flair and the other guy in a tag team with Tully for all those years, saying he never won a world championship. Meanwhile, Christian's a multi-time world champion. And I'm sitting there wondering to myself, what feud are we even promoting here? Because if the program is supposed to be Christian versus Wardlow, right now I'm more interested in seeing Christian versus Arn Anderson. Well, it would have probably been a hell of a TV feud back in the mid to late 80s if Christian was wrestling then. Could you imagine that? A prime Arn Anderson versus a prime up-and-coming Christian Cage? God, that would have been mega money. But instead we're seeing Christian versus Wardlow, which is slightly less intriguing, albeit. And, it was a great heel promo. He said all the right things. Nice to see a guy go out there and talk shit without all the pointless angles and brawls. I still have no idea what the point of the dinosaur is at this stage, but I'd rather see Christian get the title shot than him. I like the fans mocking him with the Edge's better chance. That was mildly amusing. Leave it to the AEW marks to put over WWE's talent pool over their own. Bunch of geniuses those mouth-breathing serpents are. But like I said, this is a really good promo. Christian's great. Tony Schiavone's useless. The dinosaur doesn't do a whole lot for me at this stage, but as long as it's Christian being factored into the title equation, I'm good with that. I don't know how much good it'll do for Wardlow, but again, this was the first thing on the show up to this point where it actually looked like effort was being put into building up a TV feud. Just a simple 3-minute heel promo is all they needed. Nothing overbooked. Funny how it took the almost 50-year-old ring veteran to figure that one out. Tony, let me just go out there and talk shit for a few minutes. It might be the most engaging thing on the show. Lo and behold, he wasn't wrong. And then from there, we immediately go from the penthouse to the outhouse again. Had to throw in their obligatory piss break girls match that nobody wanted to see. Even better, too, a completely arbitrary anything goes street fight with the girls. Because it's not enough that the men get to do random hardcore matches on a whim. On the same show, we had a no DQ cage match in the main event. Here in hour 2, now they got the girls doing fucking hardware matches. With Anna Jay and Julia Hart, no less. First of all, why? Second of all, not that I care, but what prompted this to be an anything goes match? Because neither girl can wrestle their way out of a wet paper bag, so you had to gimmick it all up to make it watchable? You know what would be better? Here's a genius idea that's so crazy it just might work. If you know neither girl can wrestle, maybe you just don't book the fucking match. You ever think of that, Tony? Maybe you try and rub two brain cells together for a change? Good fucking Lord. What an idiot. So that was another waste of 10 minutes. Then they followed that with another waste of 10 minutes or so. I just kept fast forwarding. A completely random 6-man tag with the House of Drek versus the Best Friends and Bandito. Because, well, apparently that battle royal last week didn't mean jack shit. The Acclaimed won. I believe the stipulation was that the winning team would get a title match out of it. So a week later, here the champs are, just randomly defending the belts against a completely makeshift trios team. Because this division sucks and everybody knows it. And of course you got Trent and Chucklefuck involved. So I tap out as soon as I see those guys on camera. Much less me tuning out anything involving the House of Drek at this point. And what the fuck was with the lighting during all this? Did they have Bray Wyatt working the production truck because somebody called off sick? What the hell was that? Another one of Malachi's clever ideas, apparently. Probably said, you know what would be cool? If we turn the lights down and made everything all dark and ominous. Because that idea worked so splendidly when WWE tried the weird lighting settings with Bray Wyatt years ago, right? Y'all remember the spoopy red lighting? That went over well. Or how about when they did similar shit with that masked luchador years ago? The hell was that guy's name? I can never remember. The one they signed from Mexico that constantly kept getting hurt because he fucking sucked as a wrestler. Didn't they do similar stuff with him too? Where they turned down the house lights and made everything all blue during his matches and you could barely ever see anything? Apparently Malachi's creative juices are flowing again. Might want to keep that guy on a leash, Tony, in case he gets out of control again. Ugh. So you guys ready to talk about the main event? Yeah. And you know, talked about it last week. When they advertised this match in a very disturbing, almost kind of sadistic way, I was really looking forward to reviewing this. I knew it was going to be bad. I just didn't know how rotten it would end up being. On a scale from bad to hideously rotten, it was about a 10 on the Richter scale, heavily leaning toward the rotten side. Not to prejudge anything we saw before they even announced the combatants, the steel cage showdown between John Cold Steve Moxley and Kenny Omega. When they announced this thing on last week's show, my face lit up. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a fucking joy. Figuring that I knew it was going to be all kinds of horrible up front, I just wanted to see how long it would take for me to break down in hysterics and completely lose it. And it didn't take long. When they opened this thing with the pre-match fight on the floor, and both guys immediately went to the fake windmill punches where neither guy came even close to making contact with each other, dude, I fucking lost it. I threw up my hands and said, yes! Let the reign of horror descend. I went back and rewatched the opening windmill punches over and over again. I couldn't stop fucking laughing. And the only thing that kept me from going back and reliving it for the rest of the night was the fact that I realized we had another 25 minutes of the show left. And Well, I did want to try to get to bed before midnight this time. And of course, because of the outlaw goose that are in charge of putting this Calamity together, you had to know the Beta Bucks were going to get involved at some point. So while Yuta and Claudio are out there trying to gang up on Omega, here come the Bucks for their super kick charade. And the attention immediately turns to them so they can brawl up the rampway with the BCC goons. At one point, dudes are just recklessly getting thrown off the ramp onto the floor. And I can't remember when, but at some point during this, Tony Schiavone, the bearer of breaking news on this show, just casually goes, "Keep in mind, folks, this is a steel cage match." That was the second point where I just cracked up. And then I saw Nick Jackson do a stage dive on everybody moments later. That did not help my composure. I'd have laughed even harder if everybody just moved out of the way and Nick would have went crashing and burning on the ground, but sadly everybody was cooperating to catch him, including his own brother, which was genius. And after about 5 minutes of reckless abandonment, completely pointless indie angles with the Bucks that served no purpose at all other than to just get them on the show, finally, they rang the bell for the start of this advertised cage match. After we literally just saw dudes doing stage dives and getting hurled off onto platforms on the floor, now is the point where they cut back to the ring so we can see these guys throw more fake work punches. Because, you know, we like to build to the climaxes here in AEW. And of course, within a matter of moments, here comes the barbed wire chair. And they got both guys doing spots with that. Mox is bleeding like 2 minutes into the fucking thing because nobody could see that coming beyond the grave. And after essentially trading spots with a barbed wire chair back and forth, they come back from break, where now Mox is beating up Kenny with the ring cables, doing one of the fakest choking jobs I've ever seen, where it was clear he wasn't even trying to put any pressure on wrenching back on the guy's throat. And then here comes the sugar glass. And they're teasing spots with that for a while. Great stuff with Omega dropping Mox back first onto it. And then Mox is sitting up seconds later, pulling Omega into a rear naked choke. Completely no-selling it. Because he's a fucking moron. So they killed the glass spot in wrestling. Not that it wasn't already preposterous to begin with. But the preposterousness only escalated from there, daddy. It only got dumber from there, if you will. Dusty Rhodes rolling in his grave looking at this bullshit before his very eyes, daddy, if you know what I'm saying. We get a really disturbing moment here. And okay, I'm going to pump the brakes here for a second. I'm going to try to be somewhat serious here when I break this down. How in the fuck this did not end in disaster, I can't tell you. Perhaps an act of God was the only thing that saved this from ending in sheer horror. But I can assure you one thing. After having watched all the garbage that transpired in this match prior to that spot, if something did end up going horribly awry, I would not have felt a bit of sympathy for either guy involved. And I genuinely mean that. And I think you know the spot I'm talking about, if you watched the match. If you didn't, I'll try to paint a clear enough picture here so you can all envision this in your head. They do a spot where Omega was supposed to give Mox the V-trigger through the gimmick side of the cage. Okay, and this is not a newfound concept in wrestling. We've seen the angle before where the guy goes to give the guy a big spear or a big tackle through the side of the cage. And you know what they do? They gimmick the side of it so when the two guys collide with it, the trap door opens up and both guys spill out to the floor. Big angle, seen it done a million times in wrestling. Particularly with, well, you know, massively big men. Not only was his gimmick contraption poorly done, but it was beyond ridiculous for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, neither of these men are big, heavy dudes. So the idea that I was supposed to buy these guys' impact could break the side of this cage is beyond absurd. Secondly, with a fucking V-trigger of all things. Not a spear. Not a running tackle where all of Omega's body weight was colliding with Moxley. But a fucking running knee? What's the dude's leg made of? Lead? Steel? Iron? Get out of here with that shit. And while that spot made me laugh in and of itself, then there was the way the cage door broke. And it just made me shake my head. And I have no idea how this was thought of, but I want you to all try to imagine this in your head. This cage, it has a giant brace on the bottom portion of it that separates the base of the cage from the upper section. And we've seen the breakaway cage door in WWE where normally the whole side of the cage would just fall over with both guys coming out. Safely, of course, because WWE is a professional company, so they would make sure that nothing would go horribly wrong when they pre-planned something like that. The problem here, in amateur elite wrestling, this cage door did not fall over in one piece. What happened was, the bottom portion stayed, and the upper meshing section basically caved in on itself. So instead of Mox and Omega falling straight out to the floor, they both essentially tripped over the lip of the bottom of the cage. Mox landed right on the back of his neck on the floor, and Omega, Jesus H. Christ, I have no idea how this guy didn't break his leg. But he actually somehow managed to catch himself between the cage and the fucking ring apron. And you actually see it on a replay. It was disgusting. His leg was basically trapped in between both of them, twisted all up like a pretzel. Probably did massive heavy damage to the cartilage, if he didn't outright tear something. I don't know. I haven't heard any medical updates in the last day or so. Keep in mind, this fucking moron just came back from being on the shelf with multiple injuries over the last year. Multiple surgeries. Problems with his knees, his back, his neck. Just his entire body was completely broken and beaten. And he's doing stupid shit like this? Just going right back to the well with all the same crap that put him out of action. Because what else would you expect? This dumb shit doesn't learn. He actually probably thought this was a good idea. And then once I learned that both guys weren't dead, well, I had a good laugh out of it. Because they're both fucking idiots. Numbskulls. The dregs of life. And then came the closing angle. Because everything else up to this point was completely nonsensical and stupid. May as well go out with a bang. Here comes Donnie Callis. And he breaks into the cage so he can steal the screwdriver from Mox. And as soon as he snatched it, that was the point where I realized this guy's about to turn on Omega. I should have called it a week ago. Silly me, though. I actually thought they were going to avoid the random pointless swerve. Gave him a little too much credit there, didn't I? And wouldn't you know it, Omega hits Mox with a one-winged angel, goes for the 1, 2, and then Callis hits Omega with the screwdriver. And Mox covers him 1, 2, 3. What a way to go out. After all the random, chaotic, nonsensical shit that we just saw in the last 20 minutes, how poetic that it all ends with a random, pointless heel swerve. Like I said, man, I knew it was going to be awful. Never doubted for a moment that it was going to suck a hard cock. Was it worse than the exploding barbed wire death match from like 3 years ago? I don't know about all that. I mean, that match was hideously infamous for a whole other variety of reasons. That one was more well-renowned for the Eddie Kingston angle at the end that blew up in their faces. No pun intended. This was just garbage TV on a whole other level of bad. And like, I don't know. I guess my expectations were already low to begin with. I can already sense the mindless sheep are going to be overrating this thing all to hell, but okay, even if we're trying to judge this impartially for a minute here, what's the big takeaway? Don Callis siding with the BCC? That's your big angle? Because William Regal saw the writing on the wall and bounced before shit really hit the fan? And now you're just going to sub Don Callis into the BCC spot? Wow. That seems kind of dumb. Is Takeshita going to be next to join them? Boy, howdy. Yeah, can't wait for those riveting next few weeks with Takeshita getting heavily pushed on TV again. Then I'm sure Hangman Page will be ready to gallop on down in his wife's butterfly jeans just in the nick of time to save everybody. The fuck? I mean, this isn't even good predictable storytelling. It's downright awful predictable storytelling. That's the worst kind. The story that is so transparent, but at the same time, it still sucks. Because in the end, you're getting to the same goal. It's just a slow, painful torture before you get there. I don't know, dude. I just don't even know what to say at this point. I really don't. I mean, I'm looking at this review time now. I've spent way longer talking about this show than I was intending. I know total viewership was up this week. I think a lot of people are going to see that number bump and think, wow, they bounced back up again. Wow, good for them. They drew 877,000 viewers, people. Those aren't good numbers. And we can keep living in this bubble and pretend like things are fine. But let me assure you one thing. I'm going to make you a promise right now. If this Saturday's show for AEW starts bringing in some eyeballs that are currently drained with how bad things are on Dynamite right now, if we start seeing some of the actual star power get focused on that Collision show, if Punk is heavily involved in the week-to-week agenting of that show, regardless of whether or not Tony is going to be overseeing everything with the booking, we're going to see Dynamite numbers dip even more. There are a lot of people like me out there right now that are purely watching this show right now for the few good redeeming qualities we get. People like to joke about the whole split roster thing when it comes to AEW, the Punk camp versus the Elite camp. If the Punk camp is strictly going to move to the Saturday show and all the Elite guys stay on the Wednesday nights, that 770,000 something number they drew last week, that might start to become the norm. Maybe even a little bit underneath that. Telling you, man, there's a very split audience right now when it comes to the people that can tolerate the Elite stuff versus the ones that tune it out entirely. I'm not even talking about their key demo necessarily. I mean, that's pretty stagnant when it comes to the people that religiously watch this show. That audience is pretty built in at this point. But when you look at the elite segments on this program, they don't do well in overall viewership. There's a very fragmented subset of the AEW audience that'll willingly sit through all that crap. And if you allow the MJFs or the FTRs or the Ricky Starks of the world, some of the lingering guys in the Punk camp, if you let them all go over to the Saturday show exclusively, and you leave the Wednesday show to be run and operated by the Bucks and Omega and all their posse of clowns, you're going to drive off more people in spades. Keep doing it. Keep pushing Orange Cassidy. Keep pushing the Best Friends. Keep pushing every single Outlaw reject that's been on this show since 2020. Everybody that's in close ties with the Bucks and Omega. By all means, let them call the shots. If they think they're doing good business, if they think that this is the crew of people that can generate revenue for this company, the people that are going to bring in vast amounts of people to watch this show every week, keep doing it. Let them oversee everything. And let Tony Khan just sit in the background and watch it all go down. I don't know what the quarter breakdowns were for this week, but going by track record here, the Bucks and Omega are not bringing in eyeballs. They're not maintaining the audience. The people that like all that stuff will stick by no matter what. But it is few and far between. And I'm thinking we might see a shift in the scope of AEW's ongoing TV product if this Saturday show takes off and gains traction. The only thing that prevents the Saturday show from overtaking the Dynamite numbers is the fact that it's a weekend show. And traditionally, we all know weekends are bad nights for cable television, especially in wrestling. The Rampage numbers have been in the toilet for well over a year now, and it's not just the crappy booking. The Friday night slot is the kiss of death when it comes to bad nights to run wrestling. Saturdays aren't much better. People will order pay-per-views on weekends, but they're not sticking around in mass numbers to watch wrestling on cable TV. People are out doing shit. But the audience for AEW has dwindled so much since the Punk drama went down last year. I'm thinking that if he gets involved in the picture again, and he's heavily featured on that Saturday show, again, regardless of how bad or good the viewership is, there are some lingering Punk viewers with this Dynamite program that'll have no issue switching permanently to the Saturday show, me being one of them. Because I'm about fed up with all this BCC elite horse shit. And all the bad outlaw wrestling with Tony's play toys that just overtake this fucking show every week. I'm over it. And I think a lot of people are too. So we'll see what happens. But I want you to keep this conversation on the radar for a later date. Because we might be revisiting it down the road. All right, retro review time. Scroll down a little bit in my notes here. I lost my place. All right, so this is NWA World Championship Wrestling from May 9th, 1987. I've done a pretty horrendous job recently trying to get the dates for all these shows here, so try to get in a better habit of doing so. And I could not think of a better way to start this show than with a highlight of last week's awesome freaking brawl with the Midnight Express, Ron Garvin, and Barry Windham. My favorite moment of Jim Cornette's career, bar none. The day he lost a one-on-one battle with the Interview Podium. If you didn't watch my Crockett review last week, go check it out. I cannot do it justice by trying to recount it a second time. But this brief highlight reel spoke wonders. It was straight out of a Looney Tunes animation with all the off-the-wall shit going down. I think David Crockett summed it up perfectly with the opening intros here, saying that Jim Cornette looked like a turtle on his back. Hell, Jim Cornette's fallen and he can't get up. And of course, I got so absorbed with everything that happened in terms of the brawl, I never even thought about how it factored into the ongoing U.S. Tag Title tournament. Now, this week, of course, they were still dealing with the semi-rounds, but they were definitely planting the seeds for what the final round was going to be. For this week, we have the Midnights versus the Rock and Roll Express. And anyone that's followed the 86 reviews know how deep-rooted that blood rivalry goes. It actually goes back even further than 86 if you want to really deep dive into the Midnight's rock and roll career. The other thing, too, speaking of Ron Garvin and the Jim Cornette feud, this was actually taped the same day that they aired the cage match in Charlotte. Of course, that would have been later in the evening. And this was Ronnie's second chance to hard sell that evident massacre. He came out to sort of recap everything that Cornette's put him through over the last few months, saying that in addition to burning his face, he's also responsible for costing him and Barry the U.S. tag titles. And Garvin didn't forget about that either. Now we're at the point where Cornette's begging and pleading for his life, even going so far as to try to get lawyers involved to get the match thrown out. And all of his efforts to weasel out of the match are not going to work. Says that tonight is where Garvin teaches Cornette a lesson in respect. He's going to take his sweet old time dissecting Cornette in front of the entire world. Tonight is the night where he teaches Corny what it's like to be a professional wrestler. Nowhere to run and hide. And while it wasn't the most fluid delivery from Ronnie here, it was very candid. And Ronnie's the kind of guy where when he talks about all the twisted things he plans on doing to the heel manager, you believe him. The old saying, you reap what you sow. And obviously we all know the cage match with him and Garvin was an instant classic. Not just from the perspective of the way Cornette tells the story so many times over, but also the implications of what it led to after the fact for both parties. Keep in mind, this was all well before the 87 Bash Tour. Well before Garvin was getting back into the world title hunt. And still, when you look back at the timeline of 87, the Ron Garvin Midnights feud is definitely one of the more memorable ones. I mean, the fireball angle's been recounted time and time again. We forget about all the stuff that happened in between. All the heat promos from Cornette, the angles where he and the Midnights fucked Garvin out of the U.S. tag titles. And there was a lot of stuff that happened in between, like February and May of 87. It's not that long of a time frame either, but they packed a lot into that short window. And it all came to a head on this night 30-something years ago. I can't do mental math in my head, but you get the picture. From there, we went to the ring for our first match in the studio, featuring the other Garvin brother, Jimmy Garvin taking on Larry Clark. And again, touching on the details of the Ronnie Midnights feud for a minute here. Tony and David mentioning that Jimmy Garvin was very influential in that overarching story. It's when they first recognized that Ron and Jimmy were kayfabe brothers on television. And Jimmy had been a heel for his entire run up to that fireball angle. And from the point that he was seen helping his brother out of the ring and taking him to the hospital, he's been a babyface ever since. No coming back from that angle. And they were well aware of that. Now, I've talked about it before. I still have my preferences for the heel Jimmy Garvin over babyface Jimmy Garvin, but personal taste. You know, Jimmy Garvin obviously won this match with a brain buster. There was a spot early on where Larry Clark nearly fucked up a basic arm drag takeover, which was glorious. I don't know how one proceeds to screw up something as basic as an arm drag off the ropes, but Larry Clark found a way. These studio jobbers were something else back in the day. Then we had a brief JJ Tully promo at the booth. A super pro Tully crowd at the studio for this particular taping. JJ spent a few minutes putting over Tully's ongoing story of the $10,000 stake for every title defense. And, well, they initially left us on a cliffhanger because they had some footage that they wanted to show us regarding Dusty Rhodes, but they waited till coming back from commercial to air what happened. When they come back, We cut to a pre-tape of one of the NWA Pro tapings where Bob Caudle was conducting an interview with both Dusty and Magnum TA. Been a while since we've seen Magnum on the show. We saw a brief glimpse of him at the '87 Crockett Cup where he was endorsing Nikita and Dusty after they won. But I think if you went back further, you'd probably have to go back to the sit-down he had with Tony Schiavone where he talked about the fallout from the car accident. Here he still had his arm in the sling and the back brace on, but he was still Magnum TA. And the promo he cut here was outstanding. He said that for weeks and months, he's heard the Four Horsemen run around and continually belittle the common man. And if there's anybody that knows a thing or two about the common man, it's Magnum TA. He's received so much fan mail and get-well cards from all the common people. And while they may not have $10,000 to flaunt around, what they do have is a nickel here and a dollar there. And, Magnum is forever grateful to those people that have supported him on his road to recovery. And then we had Dusty empty out a paper bag full of green stuff. $50,000 and counting, as a matter of fact. All money previously held by the conglomeration of the common man. And he tells the Horseman that he also knows a thing or two about the common man. His father was a plumber. He didn't make $12 an hour. But since the money is so important to the Horseman, since Tully is so obsessed with putting 10 grand on the line every time he wrestles for the world's television title, how's about they up the ante? Dusty's 50 grand versus Tully's 50 grand, and let's make it 100. Done talking. And now he's ready to do some fighting. And of course, now's the opportunity for Tully and JJ to put up or shut up. Naturally, coming to expect this from the Weasels. Well, they ain't taking the bait. JJ says that Tully is the TV champion, therefore, he dictates the policy. He determines when, where, how, and for how much he puts at stake when he wrestles. Dusty ain't calling the shots. And Tully fires back on Dusty and tells him that on Thanksgiving night 1986, it was Dusty that came out in Greensboro with Tully's name etched on the side of his head. And when it was all said and done, he walked out with nothing. Empty-handed. So as far as Tully's concerned, there's no way on God's green earth that he's wrestling Dusty on free for television. No way, no how. Fucking coward. Sorry, that was the young fan in me talking. The non-smart fan, if you will. The one that actually wanted to see Dusty beat the shit out of Tully for being a chicken. Amazing how that works out sometimes. From that awesome promo, we went to the New Breed versus Alan Martin and Clement Fields. Which, well, imagine this. Imagine you take away everything about the previous interview segment that was awesome, turn it on its head. That was this match in a nutshell. It was lame, boring, and mid at best. I mean, Royal and Champion at least hit more than 70% of their moves this time. Although at one point, Champion completely whiffed a running knee off the ropes. I don't know how, but he did. And they basically had an extended squash where the New Breed just hit like a million moves in a row. I also noted the deal where Champion gave Royal an assisted atomic leg drop off the top rope, and Champion essentially came directly down on his kneecaps. How he did not break anything, I will never know. And finally, they won with the missile dropkick brainbuster combo. Guess that would be a new finish. Because Lord knows their previous finish was any better. I think they were doing a crossbody brainbuster combo before. Now they have resorted to the middle rope dropkick. Steps in the right direction. And then we come back for the next round of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament. No flashy intros, No corny promo to get things rolling. Both teams are out, and they're off to the races immediately. You know, Ricky and Robert have been on and off of TV for the last couple months. I can't remember what cross-promotional work they were doing around this period. They might have been in Japan from what I remember, but they were back here to hit the reset button with the Midnights. Obviously, if you're well-versed in your Crockett history, you would know that this leads to bigger stuff by the end of the year. Come Starrcade time. Now, the actual program was going to need some time to reheat, though, because it's been a while since we've seen these guys engage together. But holy cow, is the chemistry still there? They didn't miss a beat from all that time they spent out of the ring wrestling each other. And they even had the added wrinkle of Stan Lane being in there instead of Dennis. It was all Ricky and Robert early on, right up through the first commercial, in fact. They worked over Bobby and Stan. Great flurry of wild offense early on. They had an early four-way breakdown spot where they double Irish whip Stan and Bobby into the opposing buckles, and they did the upside-down flip bump onto the floor. Corny's out there having a pan attack and trying to talk strategy. Obviously, the crowd is white-hot for anything the Rock and Roll do. One of the biggest pops of the match was a spot where Ricky gave beautiful Bobby the suicide dive through the middle rope to the floor. You know, back when you would only see that spot maybe once every 2 or 3 months, as opposed to like, I don't know, 6 times on every god-blessed show, with a bunch of undercard geeks, no less. And eventually the Midnights were able to control and isolate the faces. They ended up grounding and neutralizing Gibson for a little bit there. Good stuff with Bobby and Stan cutting the ring in half and using all their cheap heat tactics behind Teddy's back. Loud, thunderous, go, Robert, go chants. And eventually he gets over to Ricky so he can tag him in. Here comes the big babyface comeback. It ends up with a 4-way brawl again toward the finish. The Rock and Roll gets Stan and Bobby with 2 consecutive double drop kicks, but Bobby ends up going into Teddy accidentally, and he goes down momentarily on the floor. The babyfaces do have the visual pin, and while Teddy's getting back up to his feet, here comes Scrappy McGowan through the side curtain, and he counts the pinfall while Ricky has Bobby's shoulders pinned down. But no, it is a wave off, because Bobby's foot was on the bottom rope. And moments later, while there's arguing and pandemonium circulating, we get the shot of Ricky shoving Teddy and calling him out. Bad move. And then it's immediately followed with Ricky low-bridging Stan and sending him out to the floor illegally over the top rope. And Teddy, seeing this, officially turns heel with the studio crowd, and he awards the match to the Midnights via DQ. And of course, the heels are celebrating like they just won the frickin' belts. They're so elated that they are advancing in the tournament rounds. By hook or by crook, they advanced. And that's all that matters to them. Fans weren't too pleased about the call. But this is good stuff, man. Fun TV match. Did a great job restoring the tensions with these two teams from when they were feuding last year. The babyfaces got fucked, but you could see it definitely planted the seeds for later on when we would see this program recirculate. Trying to recapture the lightning in the bottle they had from their feud in 86. And, well, the ultimate question remains. Did it work? I'll let you be the judge of that when we review the Starrcade 87 scaffold match. The jury is still out on that one after all these years. But after that, we had the in-ring return of Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch, coming back from his, I believe, 3-week suspension from TV, courtesy of Jim Crockett. He was punished for DDTing Nikita Koloff on the concrete floor, so he was sent home in kayfabe for all of 2 or 3 weeks before being allowed to return again. Quite the punishment. He also had a brief squash with Cougar Jay that I really did not write a whole lot down about. I laughed at the fans heckling him with traitor chants. Still aren't going to let him live that one down after turning on the superpowers. We also had chants of egg-sucking dog which I know Dusty was popping for behind the curtain. This was a match where I think the fans collectively got together and said, how many random chants can we stir up in the course of a 2-minute TV squash? Beyond the ones I just mentioned, I believe we also had Dream chants, Nikita chants, and something else I forgot to jot down. But all of this was much more interesting than anything that happened in the ring. And Murdoch predictably went over with the brainbuster. Then he was at the booth next for a promo with the Russians. More accurately, a setup so they could cover another VTR. I believe from the same taping we saw with the Dusty Magnum promo earlier. But this time, it's the Russians calling out the superpowers, saying they're not waiting for Murdoch to make his TV return. They want to settle it now. Obviously a bait and switch. So here comes Dusty by his lonesome, trying to confront the Russians at a 2-on-1 disadvantage. And because it's a Dusty segment, you had to figure he had a hand in putting it together, so you knew he was going to gain the upper hand on Ivan and Pietrov. That wasn't until Murdoch ran in from behind and attacked Dusty. In a green polo, no less. Casual attire. Dusty also bladed too, doing his best to try and conceal the gimmick in his hand while the heels were stomping on his arm. It did get kind of dicey there for a minute, and they zoomed the camera in, and you could clearly see that Dusty was clenching his fist real tight there. But the heels eventually got run off by Barry and Ronnie. No explanation for where Nikita was during all this. But we also got to hear Murdoch cut a brief heat promo with Bob Caudle before Barry and Ronnie sent them packing. And that's kind of all there was to it. You know, Murdoch also had a brief promo in the live studio. And I was actually half tempted to try and record this entire promo to maybe catch at least a few words of what the hell Murdoch was trying to say. I am not kidding when I say this. He was getting so loudly pooned by the studio crowd, I just gave up trying to write anything down. He screamed to the top of his lungs, and it still was not enough with how loud the fans were drowning him out. They hated this fucking guy. Hated him with a passion. More deafening than a Dom Mysterio promo on SmackDown. That's really saying something. But, from there, we came back for a Ron Garvin squash. He wrestled Mike Force. Actually, we came back from a commercial break. Also, they could literally end up pitching to yet another commercial less than 15 seconds prior. What the hell was that formatting? It was like watching a Raw match in 2023. Guys wrestle for 10 seconds, cut to commercial, come back, and they wrestle for another minute and somebody wins. This was almost that. The only exception is Garvin actually got the pummel on Mike for like 3 minutes before he beat him with the knockout punch. And of course, this is all a prelude for what Ronnie was going to do to Corny later in the cage. David Crockett rubbing his hands together with great enthusiasm. He is the most excited man on the planet to see Corny get humiliated. An amazing man. Totally non-biased. That was a brief squash, though. Shortly followed with a new breed promo that I mostly tuned out. I heard something here about Chris Champion mentioning how we should all be jealous of seeing all the moves they executed earlier on. Never before seen moves. To which I said, never before seen, huh? Probably because they were never thought of to begin with, because most of them sucked. He's right, though. In terms of new, never-before-seen moves, I cannot recall a time where I have seen a guy do a running knee to the gut where you completely miss him. That was a new one. They called out Jimmy Valiant and Lasertron, and they showed a little bit of footage from the NWA Pro show, and well, okay, so in their promo, They talked about how Jimmy Valiant and Lasertron jumped them from behind like cowards. So they show the tape, and it was plain as day, exactly what the heels said it was. A blatant cheap shot attack. The heels are attempting to conduct an interview at ringside, and then Lasertron and Valiant run in from behind. They grab the new breed by their necks, they pull them into the ring, and they begin beating the shit out of them. The heels never saw it coming. They never got a chance to fight back. So they're not entirely wrong about being pissed. Not sure if I should be agreeing with the heels in this scenario, but I'm just pointing on what I saw. We also had Sean Royal doing some really piss-poor Dusty impersonations. Something about how when they get through being funky like a monkey, the monkey will be theirs. God, this team fucking sucked. Then we cut back to the ring for Bullet Bob Armstrong versus Randy Barber. Decent match. Bullet Bob worked over Barber and won with the middle rope axe handle. I wrote nothing else down. Then we were back at the booth for a Midnight's promo. Obviously, they're tooting their own horn over everything that transpired earlier in the U.S. tag title round with the Rock and Roll, covering all the cheap things Ricky and Robert did to try and weasel their way out of the match. And if there's one thing Corny hates, above all else, it's people that try and bend the rules. Yeah, Cornette does not like cheaters. Can't blame the guy. And while he's plugging the finals of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament next week, they're going to be wrestling Ron Garvin and Barry Windham. What Cornette is really fixated on is the cage match with Ronnie. He's reiterating all the kind people that sent in letters, saying that Corny is a charitable, kind human being that loves puppies, kissing babies, and hugging fat girls. And while he's whimpering and wishing Mama Cornette a happy Mother's Day, saying he may not be able to celebrate it with her if Ronnie gets too physical with Corny in the cage. But he concludes by informing Garvin that he's also the smartest man in the business. So he may have a trick or two up his sleeve. And right as the heels walk off, Stan pauses, and then he looks at the camera and strikes a double biflex pose. That was comedy. Simple but effective promo. And then we followed that with handsome Jimmy Valiant versus Terry Jones. It went 1 minute. Valiant won with the elbow drop. That is all. Blink and you miss it. And then immediately after that, Barry Windham wrestled Rick Sullivan, which was also short, but slightly more noteworthy than the Valiant match. Mostly in the sense that they did more than 3 moves before they directly went to the finish. I also got a kick out of seeing Barry take a full 180-degree bodily rotation after hitting the running lariat. Most of the time, he'll just hit the ropes full speed and then come back landing on his back. Here, I'm sure he did a full flip bump. Must have had a lot of momentum going. He also had a quick follow-up interview with David Crockett, and aside from talking about all the prestigious championship belts he's looking to get his hands on, the U.S. Tag Title Tournament will come full circle on next week's show, seeing that we're right back to where we all started with the Garvin Windham versus Midnight's feud. We've seen the match on TV before, and, well, we're going to see it again. Good point. Not much to add beyond that, though. You'll notice I'm sort of rapidly going through some of these latter segments on the show. Really not a whole lot to talk about with the bulk of them. Take, for example, Nikita Koloff versus Chance McQuaid. Give you 3 guesses on what happened here. If your answer was, did Nikita beat him up for a couple minutes and then win with the Russian sickle? The answer is, yes. You win the grand prize. And what's the grand prize? I have no clue. I did not think that far. Nikita's follow-up promo was pretty great, though. Talk about a man out for blood. Says that he couldn't leave Dusty one day without having to watch him get blindsided by Dick Murdoch and the Russians. And while Nikita did a fiery babyface promo here, saying the superpowers are coming to seek their revenge, still never explained where he was. Why he was absent from that brawl with Dusty where he got attacked by the heels. Possibly training at the gym, working on his shoulder neck game. Good Lord, that guy's neck is fucking ginormous. Not the kind of guy you want to try to have a test of strength with. Just throwing it out there, man. His shoulders and neck were probably half my entire body weight, easily. Like, you don't think about it much until you see him on camera, but good Lord, it stood out. So, what the hell do we have next? Oh yeah, Ric Flair promo. And it's Slick Rick at his finest here. Talking about all the wealth he accumulates every time he travels from city to city. Talks about the thousands upon thousands of women that wait outside the Horsemen's hotel rooms each and every night, getting ready to ride Space Mountain. And yet there's still one woman that's playing hard to get all these weeks later. Even after going out of his way to buy her a $15,000 coat out of his own pocket, Precious is still trying to avoid Rick. So Flair's got the solution. In order to get back at Precious, if she's going to be stubborn and refuse to give Flair that bit of action he was seeking, then Flair's going to take it out on her husband, Jimmy Garvin. And after Flair gets done with him, he's then going to steal the coat back. And, by the way, not making this up, this is essentially what Ric Flair said. He's going to steal the coat back and, more or less, forcibly copulate with her. Trying to keep it mildly PG for YouTube, but grape. I think that's essentially what Flair was promising here. And not the fruitful kind. And it was at that point where we cut back to the ring for a Horseman onslaught. Luger, Arn, and Tully versus Rocky King, Larry Stevens, and some other job guy that was completely futile, and I didn't even bother writing his name down. They all got fucking killed. Definitely a babyface Horseman match, though. The fat, balding job guy here, he was particularly horrible. So naturally, he took the bulk of the heavy beating. Lots of constant in and out tags from all three Horsemen. I think Luger's contributions to this match consisted of one military press and a flex. So I might rescind that a little bit. This was a Tully and Arn match, and Luger was just kind of hanging out in the periphery. But they worked over everybody individually, and Arn eventually beat the fat job guy with the gourd buster. And of course the fans popped because the Horsemen were total baby faces on this show. Didn't even try to hide how over they were. And immediately following that, they managed to suck all the air out of the room by sending out Paul Jones to lull people into a coma with a boring monologue. I wrote down almost nothing about this promo. He called the Rock and Roll Express contenders, which I think was intended to be an insult. And I also laughed to the point where he said that Paul Ellering was getting the Road Warriors motivated to come after Manny and Rude for the World Tag Titles. It's been well over a year, and these Paul Jones promos are still at the bottom of the barrel on these shows. And, you know, on the one hand, it used to be high comedy because he was so over the top, bumbling over himself constantly. I used to get some enjoyment out of it. We are now in 1987. I think it's starting to become turn the channel heat. Every time he comes out to talk, I want someone to come out from the side with one of those giant cane hooks and just yank him off camera as quickly as possible. And I've also said this before, but I will reiterate. Bull and Rude, literally the most inefficient World Tag Team Champions in the entire history of Crockett Promotions. And they're usually on the show every week. We never see them defend the belts. We never see highlights of anything they're involved with on the house shows. They've had like 1 or 2 ongoing TV feuds, and the rest of the time they're out there talking trash. Nothing ever happens. It's the same stuff every time. Do they actually end up having a match with the Road Warriors at any point? I don't even remember. I'm sure maybe a few spot shows they might have done some matches and maybe some DQ finishes or something, but I mean, they obviously never beat them for the belt, so I'm just curious on whether or not this feud actually goes anywhere before Rude and Bull walk out with the belts. Maybe that's what happened. By the time they had the idea for this program, Rude and Bull had already left the company, so they didn't really get a chance to extend the feud in any way. Now, sticking with that whole situation with the title picture, the closing angle on the show was seeing Paul Ellering get confronted by Paul Jones while the Legion of Doom were working a match. And it got heated very quickly. And while Ellering was getting in Jones's face, here come Rude and Bull from behind to jump Ellering and lay him out. And of course, they all powdered quickly thereafter while Hawk and Animal were steamrolling toward the podium. And apparently Hawk was deaf and couldn't hear the managers screaming at each other from like 20 feet away. Nevertheless, the Legion of Doom called out the champs and basically told them they were going to eat their lunch. Animal made a good point here when he said that he and Hawk like beating people up for no reason at all. What do you think happens when you give the Road Warriors an incentive to beat the shit out of you? Starting to think Bull and Rude weren't wanting to find out as a shoot. But Ellering restated that they just made it personal, and now they're going to get their tails kicked. Paul Jones is going to forever regret the day he set his beady little eyes on Paul Ellering. And, well, it was a hot way to go out. I'm just sad that I don't think much ever came out of this program. And again, the last hour didn't really have a whole lot going on outside the angle at the very end with the Road Warriors. Most of this week's news kind of fell within the first 45 minutes or so. This was all about hyping the cage match with Garvin and Corny and Charlotte for later on. Elsewise, it was a pretty cut and dry, bare bones episode of Crockett TV. Some minor story advancement here and there. We're still gearing up for the Bash Tour, and that's all well and good. Not a must-see episode or anything, and I think over the next few weeks, as I just talked about, we're going to have a lot of shorter TV episodes to cover, so we might not have much to address there either. I mean, I took a peek on the network here. I think runtime for the next 2 or 3 weeks are somewhere in the 40-minute ballpark. I'm not sure what was going on during that time where they would have only been doing hour-long shows as opposed to 2. Nevertheless, be on the lookout for some shorter Crockett TV reviews in the next couple weeks, and if they're not as eventful or noteworthy, comes with the territory, I guess. And speaking of shorter recaps, World Class this week was a simple in and out procedure. Name that movie line. More importantly, this was our premiere episode of the David Memorial Parade of Champions event at Texas Stadium. Now, the actual event was taped on the 6th, but as per usual with World Class schedules, they air the events over a series of multiple weeks to show the matches in full. Not the entire card, obviously in one sitting. It's spaced out. But we basically got the first third of the event this week. And of course, from the jump, we get that awesome shot of the outdoor arena. Packed stadium with all those fans. I can't remember what the gate was for the show, but it was easily somewhere in the 20 to 25,000 range. Because this thing was packed to the top of the venue. Almost every last seat was filled. And, they've done the Parade of Champions shows in the 60s and 70s, but this was the first one that was honored toward David under the World Class banner as opposed to Big Time Wrestling, which was the old company name. And again, the camera shots for this thing were awesome. The great wide shots, the floor cam footage. I mean, production was great overall. Obviously, with it being taped outdoors during the day, you had that natural sunlight there. That was cool seeing. Mark Lorenz was the play-by-play guy here, and he was fine. Not as fun to listen to as Bill Mercer. Little dry when it came to bringing energy to some of the matches, but he wasn't horrible. Typically, Lorenz would do some commentating for the Fort Worth shows, so it's not like he didn't have experience from doing it. With Mark, though, I mean, if you go back and listen to him, he had a very low-key personality to begin with. Probably not conducive to a pro wrestling environment, especially for a show like this, but I mean, it was what it was. And again, we got to see the first set of matches they taped for this thing. The one they aired here to start was the Junkyard Dog versus the Missing Link. Only got about 6 minutes and some change overall. JYD's been absent from a lot of the recent Dallas tapings, but he was sporadically showing up throughout 84 to do some small work here and there. We've obviously covered a lot of the downfall period of JYD. 84 was really where things took a turn for the worse in his career. And he even kind of saw that during this match with Missing Link. And as much as I've buried the Missing Link gimmick, Dog wasn't giving him much to work with here. He was very slow. Physically, his stature was probably at an all-time worst. He was really out of shape. Clearly not in the best mental state by this point. Just a matter of months from this point was when he walked out of Mid-South without notice and left for the WWF. So, it was rough undergoing for the Dog. They did some really jerky spots for a few minutes until Skandar Akbar tried to grab Dog's foot under the bottom rope to help Link cheat. And they did the classic ref reversal finish where they initially award the match to the heels, but the entire arena blows a gasket, so they managed to convince the referee to reverse the decision. Bronco came out there and talked with him too, so when it became abundantly clear that Akbar got involved, the ref raised Dog's hand and awarded him the match instead. And after the fans popped, they show Missing Link on the floor grabbing the ring steps, and rather him throwing the steps into the ring in a feat of frustration, instead, the genius plan of the Missing Link was to take said ring steps, put them against the ropes, and then begin headbutting them very forcefully. I had a good laugh at that. Again, match was hideous, but, we talk about this being a completely different time in the business. Junkyard Dog could literally have the worst match of all time, and it never mattered because he was so beloved by the fans. It's honestly a case of him being so over. The ring work never really mattered. He was a larger-than-life icon to everybody in the wrestling world, man. If you were a wrestling fan back in the day, especially in the South, you knew who JYD was. Even non-wrestling fans from the South knew who JYD was. It was good to give him a featured spot on the card. He was very instrumental in the Dallas region, just like he was working for Bill Watts in the early 80s. Getting him on the card in this capacity in front of a hot crowd like that, didn't matter how good or bad the match was. It was all about the attraction special. That was followed with the American Tag Team title match, second on the card. Heel champions, the Super Destroyers of Devastation Inc., taking on babyface challengers, the Iceman King Parsons, and my man, Rock and Roll Buck Zumhoff. We'll just ignore the criminal record and pretend that wasn't a thing. Check out the wiki page if you're curious. Now, if you've been following the Dallas reviews, The Iceman's been feuding with Skandar Akbar and the Devastation Inc. crew for several months now, going all the way back to the Fireball angle. And the Iceman's gone through a series of tag partners to challenge the Super Ds. I believe this was his first time teaming with Zumhof. And if I'm not mistaken, too, I think this actually winds up being a stable team in the world-class region going forward. I mean, as a match, it was okay. Had the usual flurry of offense from the babyfaces. Super Ds bumped around and sold for the Iceman and Zumhof. I enjoyed the spot where the Iceman drove one of the Super Ds into the corner buckle a few times. So in order to fire up, the Super D continued to mash his head into the corner buckle, and then he turned around and ate a right hand from the Iceman. And Zumhof got cut off during the blind tag spot from the heels. They had him isolated for a little bit so they could slow things down and build up to the big babyface comeback. They did a cool double sunset flip near fall with the babyfaces toward the finish. Got a big pop for the 2 count there. And while the heels were illegally double teaming the Iceman, they did the double Irish whip spot to Parsons, and he ducked coming off the ropes, and he hit one of the Super Ds with a hip attack. The other Super D, can't remember what happened to him. I think he just kind of fell down. And somehow being unable to break up the pinfall when the Iceman went to pin the other Super D. That was interesting. And obviously the crowd went ballistic for the title switch. You know, another match where the environment sort of outweighed the work rate, which I know is the thing we get so fixated on a lot of the time. But they packed a lot into that short window. It really didn't go that long. But the title change at the end was what got the loudest reaction. You know, like I said with the Iceman and Zumhof, I believe this tag team becomes a regular recurring team on television. So it wasn't just a random makeshift pairing in the Iceman's never-ending saga with the General's heel crew. But really wasn't much to say aside from the stuff I mentioned. Decent match, babyfaces over clean. And again, we'll just try to ignore rock and roll pedo Zumhof's personal life outside the wrestling business. You can look that up on your own time. What we will not ignore, however, was the Bad Street USA music video premiere. Yeah. I have seen this music video many times over throughout the years. It is famously great and awful at the same time. Not for anything relating to Michael Hayes' abysmal lip syncing. That is not a newfound concept if you've ever seen music videos before. I mean, some musicians are better at masking it than others. Hayes was particularly horrific at it. I also do not know who the musicians were that filmed the guitar and the drum segments in the studio here. I know the cliche is to say that this was total 80s rock, but for somebody like me that grew up listening to a lot of classic 70s and 80s rock music, guilty pleasure, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, this was kind of my jam as a kid. In my leisure time, taking walks or cooking or doing whatever, I would sometimes have this show up on my playlists, and it still slaps all these years later. Surely better than any of the artificial canned wrestling music we get nowadays. I'll take this over Seth Rollins' fucking theme song any day of the week. I mean, I can't do the breakdown of it justice. You've got to go out of your way to watch it on your own time. It is fantastic. Bad Street USA, ma'am. All-time classic footage right there. And obviously that was all great lead into our main event of the show. Not what main event of the actual stadium event. I believe that was the world title match with Kerry and Flair. But for this week's TV main event, the 6-man Bad Street USA street fight. Kevin, Mike, and Fritz Von Erich versus all 3 of the Freebirds. All coming out in street clothes for this no rules, no DQ style enforced match. With the exception of one rule, according to David Manning. This would still follow the regulations of a normal tag match, meaning that there could only be 2 wrestlers in the ring at a given time. Or else, And I even wrote that down as a question mark. Or else? Or else what? He disqualified these men in a match that was already no DQ? How would have he enforced that? I mean, he failed by the end of it, but just throwing the question out there. The answer is he did not think it through. But they had a great angle to kickstart this thing with the faces and heels going right at it before the opening bell. All the chaos and pandemonium with the heels throwing shit around at ringside. Terry Gordy flinging a chair and nearly taking out Manning and Fritz with it. And that is when Manning got in the house mic and said, no, we're going to lay some ground rules for this match. We're not about to let this break down into a six-way clusterfuck. We had the great camera shot where Kevin's hand was already busted open. I don't know what happened. I guess he cut it on one of the chairs. But even with Manning trying to enforce the tag rules here, he still had his work cut out for him. This was indeed the definition of a Pier 6 brawl from pretty much bell to bell. Broke down about halfway through with Fritz getting in there so he could take off the belt and start giving Hayes a few spankings with it. He had Mike in the corner holding him against the ropes to make sure he couldn't break free. That obviously got a monstrous pop. They got a brief chance to work over Kevin for the heat. Hayes was able to give Kevin a few stiff shots with a cowboy boot at one point. That was where they shot the close-up of Kevin in white jeans and you could see all the blood splotches on his pants. And after Fritz got in there for the hot tag at the end, yet again it broke down with all six guys. Fritz was able to get the claw locked in on both Hayes and Buddy before Gordy cut him off. They ended up doing the double bonk spot with the heels. And somehow with all the bedlam and anarchy at the end, Kevin managed to tag himself in so he could hit Buddy Roberts with a diving crossbody attack for the pin, practically overshooting Buddy on the landing, but he still pulled it off. And while the Von Erichs are in there celebrating the victory, they are also awarded with the six-man tag team trophy, as per the stipulations, because Fritz was coming out of retirement for this one match. If the babyfaces won, that meant that Kerry could step in to replace Fritz as the third half of the champions. And, well, the celebration was short-lived, because the heels are immediately there to jump the babyfaces. Somehow during this fight, we also had the world-class debut of, directly stated by Mark Lorenz, quote, a huge, strange Oriental. Not kidding. And who was this huge, strange Oriental that Lorenz was speaking of? Turns out it was Killer Khan, who they did not refer to as such by this point. An unnamed source. But he was in there to randomly help the Freebirds assault the Von Erichs. More or less to no avail. Kerry was able to come out and send the heels packing almost immediately. Not the most effective TV debut, and I still love the totally politically incorrect way of Lorenz putting over his debut, but yeah, that was that. Match was a lot of fun. Didn't need to go an extensive length of time to get the point across. They advertised a brawl. They delivered on that promise. And the attraction was seeing Fritz come out of retirement to get some comeuppance on behalf of his boys, so that was well done. The title switch was the other half of the story, and it wasn't entirely unforeseen. I don't really know much about Khan's run in World Class. Like, I know he was there for a short stint, but I mean, he was another one of those guys that moved around from territory to territory very frequently. Kind of like how Andre was a special attraction who didn't stay in one area all that long. Killer Khan was sort of the heel version of that in a lot of ways. Probably his most notable feud was the stuff he did with Andre in the early 80s. Didn't remember much about anything outside the WWF, though. I think before he retired, he may have done some business with Hogan, but I don't think that ever really surfaced on a big stage. But forever how long he lasts in World Class, we'll see what he does. Him working as a muscle for the Freebirds seems a little strange. Not really sure what that all leads to. But again, I've talked about before how my world-class knowledge kind of jumps around, especially as we get further along in the timeline. But that was basically the first set of tapings for the Stadium show. Next week I think they're going to be airing the Carrie Flair title match, and I will definitely have plenty to say about that one. For a first night, though, getting to see that crowd again and a lot of that footage, it really put into perspective how critical this show was for a lot of fans. Not just fans in the Texas area, but all across the country. I mean, they understood the importance of David's contributions to the business, and the packed stadium told the story. I believe they exaggerated the attendance on this show a little bit. What did Lorenz say it was? I think he said like 50,000. Nah, I don't think it was that much. I mean, the most, we're probably talking like 30,000. I mean, it's no small feat. Definitely not trying to undercut it. But 50,000? Come on now. But this is a very memorable event in the history of the business. One that I think deserves a very deep conversation, especially if you're a wrestling historian and you enjoy doing deep dives on classic content. The David Memorial Parade of Champions from May of 1984. This one definitely ranks among the most important ones. And we're just getting started, baby. Got a couple more shows of this. Anyway, that'll be all for next time. And as we conclude this week's podcast, make sure you all subscribe, comment, and do all that good stuff. We're back to a normal Monday schedule. I will let you know now, the Monday show will probably go up a little later than normal. I should be able to get it uploaded by then, but it might take a little longer, so don't be surprised about that. And I think we're smooth sailing for a little bit. Like I said, my schedule is going to be a little hectic over the next couple weeks, but I'm going to try to make everything work out. And I know for a fact we have some upcoming events, pay-per-views. So we just saw the Backlash show. AEW has a, Double or Nothing? Is that the name of it? I already forget. Yeah. May 28th at the T-Mobile Arena. And then if I'm not mistaken, what does WWE have, like a Clash of Champions or something like that coming up? Night of Champions, okay. Shit. It's on the 27th. Ugh. It's going to be hard to get that in there. We'll try. We will try. Well, we'll figure it out. Poor planning on my part, but... Well, no, that's more poor planning on their part for trying to cram all that together on one weekend. It's going to be a packed Monday show for then. We'll see what we can do. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you soon. Take care. Peace out.